So why read the Old Testament chronologically? I think there's a good reason to do it, and I'd like to take a brief minute to explain that. I grew up with, maybe you did too, a great respect for Scripture. I'm so glad I did, and that's a wonderful thing. But what has happened in our reading of Scripture, because we respect all of Scripture, let's say we're reading the Old Testament, and we wonder what a text means. Our inherent respect for all of Scripture has often led us to think in terms of the end as well as the beginning, let's say the New Testament. And so what we'll often do when trying to figure out a text in the Old Testament, we'll go all the way to the end of the story because we have more information and we respect Scripture. So we take that information and we bring it back this way. And here's the issue, though. We often bring it back through a creed or through a denominational lens, right? And so by the time we have done this way of reading Scripture, especially the Old Testament, we have tended to read it, well, that's the term that we tend to put on this. We have a confessional reading of Scripture. What I'd recommend that we do instead, and this is where our chronological reading will be helpful, is that when we read a text of the Old Testament, we don't read ahead. We treat it like a novel, where the writer wants us to get involved in the story, and he or she will tell us, as they want to, the information that we need to know. So in that sense, we won't get ahead of the story. We'll stay in the story, and when the next story comes along, we'll go into that story as well. And we'll proceed our way through this. By the way, we will be asking a very important question, well, two questions actually, as we go, and that would be, what would the original writer and what would the original reader know as we move along? That would be the way to find out the information as we go. Instead of looking ahead, it'd be again like looking in a novel and paging ahead to find something, that we think in terms of simply what would we have known at the time that we were given the information we had. This is called a dramatic reading of Scripture. It treats the Bible with the same respect. Both ways of reading Scripture are based upon the authority of Scripture. But the second way is the way we're going to be approaching Scripture. It's what I like to call the left to right method of reading, so that we take the information we have and we move forward from there. Why do it this way? Well, I think Scripture was written this way, right? The reader had an audience in mind as he was writing. This is also how meaning generally develops in the writing of any book or text, is you use the meaning that you would have at that moment and not something that would come later. And thirdly, this is a big one. This is where we, or me, will come into the story. A good storyteller knows how to bring the reader into the story at the right time, and that is what Scripture will do. There will be a place for you and I in our story, in the story of Scripture at the end.